Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dave Reist, and it's my honor to welcome you here to the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. On behalf of Mr. Mike Swetnam, our CEO, who can't join us today, and General Al Gray, this is the second event in our cyber series, and it's called Informing the Debate. And the reason why we call it Informing the Debate is here at the Institute, we're not thinking that we're going to come up with any solutions here, but we think it's extremely important to start discussing these issues. And here we have a focus on science, technology, and policy. So we're going to take one of our niches today for this segment, and we're going to go after genetics, neuro, and nanotechnology. I'm going to pass it here in a minute to Dr. G and let him introduce the panel, because I can't talk about what they can. I can guarantee it. I'm here to learn a lot today and listen. But I'd like to talk about two things, first of all. Our next event is going to be on the 30th of March, and we're going to look at the ethical, social, and legal side of this issue. And right now, we have one of our senior fellows, Dan Gallington, and we have Mr. Jim Woolsey, the former director of the CIA, who's going to speak that day. We're going to round out the panel with one or two more. On the 4th of May, we're going to look at another aspect of it from the government and the private side of business and the government as they there's a little bit of a friction ownership policy side of this. We're going to talk about that a bit more. The names, we're flushing those out at this time. My second point, I don't think we could have timed this better. Because when you look at, for those of you, I'm a very blue-collar guy, I can tell you. I'm watching Jeopardy every night this week. And for those that are watching Jeopardy every night this week, there's a computer named Watson that IBM has built, and he's playing against two of the best champions of the past. And the computer won last night. Watson, obviously, because named after Watson, who founded that fine firm. But as we talk about land, air, sea, space, cyber, from a military side, as we've coined this, look at the implications and some of those topics for those that have been watching this week on the implications. And as Dr. G talks about the brain and the mind and where we're going in this genre, I got to tell you, it's scary. I think this Jeopardy show this week has done more to educate Americans on where we're possibly going, but just intuitively, where could we go to? There's going to be more questions raised from this show. This has probably been one of the best things. And this panel today, I think, will delve into some of those things. So with Dr. G, who has an impressive resume along with our other panelists, but I'm going to let him. G?
Thanks, Joe, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to each and all of you for being here today. One of the things that we'd like to do over the next several months is put out for you the notion of the cybercosm. That term is a term that's used by my colleague in the back of the room, Lieutenant Commander Matt Labert. And one of the things we'd like to recognize is, as we were discussing earlier, sir, is not only that cyber is a tool, a technique, a technology, it's certainly a form of science, ever more so, because like so many of the sciences, it seeks to integrate knowledge and put it to work. There is a distinct knowledge that is engaged by cyber technology. Certainly the techniques that then engage cyber science are broad. Their applications are diversified, and in many ways cyber represents a convergent tool in that its utility can be framed by, and at the same time reciprocally frames, various applications, not only in the sciences, but certainly in public life, and increasingly in national defense, security, and intelligence. The notion of intelligence, as General Reist alluded to earlier, is key to the entire construct of cyber. In some avenues, we see cyber as being siloed within the confines of intelligence information management. In others, we see it more as a broad scientific construct, an open construct, a worldview, a zeitgeist. How then can we utilize information in a variety of different tiers and strata, ranging from the information purely as information bits within a cyber world, to the way biological and perhaps non-biological cyber-enhanced organisms then engage that information to intuit the shifting architectonics of the realities of our applications in a variety of environments, inclusive of the social sphere. That said, one of the more important areas where cyber has been leveraged and gains purchase is in the notion of convergent scientific applications. Obviously, cyber as both tool and technology and cyber as science create a triangulation, standing alone, standing as a technology that then affords and is engaged with other scientific approaches and technologies, and as an operational tool. And if you picture this triangulation, what you'll see is that cyber on one end, geno on the other, nano on the other, can be indeed molded together to shape yet a new point of the spear that may be applications in chemistry, physics, biology, but ever more so in the area of neuroscience, particularly given the next 10 years agenda of a proposed decade of the mind, building off of the momentum of the previous decade of the brain, 1990 to 2000. That said, I have before you a group of colleagues of mine and the generals who bring to the fore expertise in genetics and medicine and nano and convergent sciences. Obviously, beginning from the point of genetics is critical because the notion of computational capability was fundamental in establishing both the Human Genome Project and its various applications. Constructive data banking and utilizing computational capacity and an ever-iterative set of technologies was instrumental both to not only the Genome Project but its various applications. And critical to that was the foresight that went into understanding the need for ethical, legal, and social issues analysis as part of the Human Genome Project. Obviously, the construct of cyber is enhanced by scalar dimensionality. As such, nanoscience and nanotechnologies increase the computational capability and in many ways may sidestep what heretofore was known as the restrictions of Moore's law. Also here we see the application of nanoscaffolds and nanomaterials to be able to then allow various cyber-capable sensors, receivers, and transmitters to then be used both in the physical sciences as well as the natural sciences, inclusive of biology. And of course the notion of cyber and cybernetics is fundamental to neuroscience, because here we see the potential for a non-Kurzweilian singularity, a fusion of a variety of these different sciences to be able to poke into an access, manipulation of the human and other species' brain-mind, and perhaps the instantiation of a cyber-type organism. That said, what we'd like to do is present these different fields as they stand poised to engage cyber and reflect a cyber mindset. Our first speaker is Professor Nneka Mokwunye. She is the director of the Center for Ethics at Washington Hospital Center. And what she'll be discussing is the notion of the cyber-genetic fusion as it relates to construct data banking and its potential implications and the need for security. Please welcome our first speaker, Professor Mokwunye.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I hope I get this right, so bear with me if my technology is a little simple. I like the little clickers better. So, thank you, Dr. G, for that introduction. I'm going to talk today about cyber technology and genetic science. I am a clinical ethicist, so this is broadening my field a bit, and how I'm putting this together is how this is going to relate to the public, to the world that we are now with medicine, and how it looks in the future. Oh, this is going good. Right now, as a result of the opportunity for direct consumer marketing, pharmaceutical companies are able to do direct advertising and make the public very aware of their medicines, very aware of the options that they have. They use a lot of imagery that helps people feel comfortable and confident in the way the medicine is going to provide some sort of care and relief of suffering. But they also are giving a glimpse into the progress of how medicine is going. This ad that I'm going to show you in a second allows for us to get a glimpse of where we are now, see what our constituents in the hospital, who are future patients, what they feel. When they come into clinic visits or hospital visits, they have a mindset already of things that they believe are going to relieve their pain and suffering, and the possibility of the conflict when what they think is their appropriate course of action doesn't match up with what we see in medicine. So this is where we are, and I will attempt, I think I can do this. Oh, there we go. So I'd like you to pay very close attention to this ad. This is a real ad for a drug, it's Celebrex, and I'm sure you all are aware of this drug. And pay very close attention to how they try to market to the general
When it comes to
population.
relieving arthritis pain, you may think some prescription NSAID pain relievers like ibuprofen and naproxen don't have any cardiovascular risks. But based on the available research, that's not clear. And if you look closer, the FDA requires all these NSAID pain relievers, including Celebrex, to have the same cardiovascular warning. Any prescription NSAID, including Celebrex, may increase the chance of heart attack or stroke, which can lead to death. This chance increases if you have heart disease or risk factors for it, such as high blood pressure or when NSAIDs are taken for long periods. All NSAIDs, including Celebrex, also increase the chance of serious skin reactions or stomach and intestine problems, such as bleeding and ulcers, which can occur without warning and may cause death. With any of these medicines, patients also taking aspirin and the elderly are at increased risk for stomach bleeding and ulcers. While all NSAIDs have some of the same warnings, they all treat arthritis pain. But since individual results may vary, having options is important. An NSAID like Celebrex may be one option. In fact, prescription Celebrex has never been taken off the market. Based on the available data, the FDA stated that for certain patients, Celebrex's benefits outweigh the risks. But only you and your doctor can make that decision. Let's dive deeper. In clinical studies, a lower percentage of patients on Celebrex reported indigestion, abdominal pain, and nausea versus prescription ibuprofen and naproxen. Celebrex can be used with low-dose aspirin. Other prescription NSAIDs aren't generally recommended with aspirin. Celebrex relieves arthritis pain, stiffness, and inflammation. Just one 200 milligram dose provides 24-hour relief. Do not take Celebrex if you're pregnant or have had allergic reactions to aspirin or sulfonamides. And tell your doctor if you've had kidney or liver problems. For many with arthritis pain, not treating is not an option. Talk to your doctor about Celebrex and see what's right for you. Understand the risks, see the benefits. When it comes to relieving arthritis pain, you may think,
There we go. Okay. So, the initial feeling of that commercial, the imagery, the blue, relaxed lighting, the riding the bike with the dog, dancing with his wife, all of these are images of comfort, relief of pain, relief of anxiety. The benefits are very clearly stated, right? Relieves arthritis, pain, and inflammation. Lower percentage of these patients had side effects. And it can be used with aspirin. So even if you have heart disease, you can add aspirin on this one, unlike the other NSAIDs. But the risks, heart attack, stroke, stomach bleeding, ulceration, nausea, abdominal pain, indigestion, and death was actually said 3 times in this commercial. They somehow are not really highlighted in the same way. Anytime a risk came up, you'd see they panned out to something else. They labeled it, they said it, but then they made it seem like this is not really that big of a deal because look at what you can do on this drug. And the biggest part that was highlighted in this video was the FDA stated that Celebrex, of course, the benefits outweighed the risks. So, again, benefits of relief of pain from arthritis and inflammation outweighs the risk of heart attack, stroke, and potential death. My mother, who is my reference for all things, she, every time she sees a pharmaceutical commercial, always goes, why on earth would I want to take that? Why? But that's where we are. That's the options that we have now. Even though the risks bring up emotions of fear and anxiety and distrust of the medical field, we still highlight and push as if this is the only way you have to go. These are your only options. But I'm not sure about that. As the commercial says, individual results may vary. That's what they always say, right? Individual results may vary. Well, we'll see. We'll dive into the history of the Genome Project, because the question is, where do we go from here? The new answer obviously came up from the Human Genome Project, which was started back in the early 90s and completed by 2001. Actually, February is the month that they're celebrating the completion of the 90% of the Human Genome Project, which sequenced the 90% of all of the 3 million genes and was published in the Journal of Nature. In October of 2002, there was a guide that was published by researchers to show how to mine human genomic data and encouraged researchers and scientists to explore all these options, which established a greater exploration of what to do with all these genes that we've now opened. And in between the years of 2003 and 2004, there was a major movement in the Human Genome Project to further the understanding of genomics, leading to the fields of study that we now call pharmacogenomics and pharmacogenetics. And in celebration of that, where medicine went was this concept of personalized medicine. These are kind of small, but the important dates in pharmacogenetics history. In the 5 years between 2004 and 2009, pharmacogenetics expanded astronomically. The creation of cancer-based genomic therapy in the early years, all the way through hospitals attempting to standardize personalized medicine for their patients. As you can see, in 2009, Mass General was the first hospital to try and set that as a standard. What has this done for the field? This is making us realize that genetics and the power of doing things based off of the genetic factors in humans is very, very important. Things like, if you can see, in August 2006, Senator Barack Obama at the time introduced the Genomics and Personalized Medicine Act. So now this became not just something that science respected, and it was now the government's job to try and figure out what to do with it. In 2008 was the infamous GINA Act, which is the Genetic Information Non-Discriminatory Act that was signed into law, allowing people to not be discriminated against based off of their genetic assignment. But the reality of these important dates is by the end of 2009, personalized medicine, pharmacogenomics, pharmacogenetics, these were all words that were now in our population as standard language. This was the wave of the future. These were the directions that we were going. And our public was becoming very much aware that that's the path that medicine was taking. So what is personalized medicine? It's the ability to treat options of personalized issues directly using your genomic makeup. So instead of just giving a drug like Celebrex based off of research studies that was done historically on white men between the ages of 30 and 45, now a person who doesn't fit that characteristics could have their genes sequenced, find a medicine that relates specifically to their genetic makeup, and allow for a greater success in treatment. The big flip side of this is all those side effects that were listed before supposedly now will go away because it's specialized personally to you. That's the direction in which we're going. It's the next steps in what appropriate optimal clinical care is looking like. However, the public, becoming more aware of this, now is demanding more freedom and control and the ability to find out about their own care. They're using cyber technology, the internet is the best mode for dealing with this, to try and access their own personal information as best as they can. This enters the world of spitomics. This is not a word that you would see often, but this was definitely a big, big boom in the world of cyber technology and genetics. Spitomics.
You have to explain that one.
Yes.
Literally, it's fun.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, so spitomics, as in you spit. In 2008, there was a big, big boom. In the front of the New York Times style section, there was an article about New Yorkers holding spitomic parties, where they would get together and spit into little cotton tubes for $400 a person, or sorry, $399 a person. You could spit in this cotton tube and send it off to this company called 23andMe, and they would do a genetic profile on you. So the public started getting very excited about this, right? Because now you could find out detailed information on yourself. They would give you fun facts like, oh, how quickly do you metabolize caffeine? So can I really eat all that chocolate and drink all that coffee? Or, you know, should I stay away from it because I really I can't function if I go on it? To the serious stuff like, am I susceptible for lung cancer or diabetes? But the array was all done, so the public started demanding. 23andMe took up this demand, made a big deal about it, offered the options on the internet. People started hosting parties to get their genetic information. And the final fact on here that was the most interesting was there was the idea to create a Facebook version of genetic testing, right? So if you and I share the same funky mutation, we could be friends on this genetic Facebook. Luckily, that's just still an idea. Nobody's yet set it up. But it was one that a lot of people started thinking about. Social networking was booming. Every kid had a MySpace page and a Facebook page. That was the way to communicate. That was the way to advertise. That was the way to get a hold of millions of people at one time. So why not do the same thing with genetics, especially since the new movement was to find out more about what's going on with me. Nowadays, though, instead of a genetic Facebook version, there is still links on websites all over the place where you could find out paternal heritage if you knew that you were a child who was the product of sperm donation. It's been all over the television, all over the internet, people getting together, finding out their siblings all over the country, Facebook friending them, becoming part of their own little networks of children who were results of parents going and having the same file number 545 at such and such clinic be the sperm donor for their reproduction. So the public is very, very, very interested in figuring out how to control again this element of genetics, especially because it's the most personalized we've gotten when it comes to medicine. So they're putting their 2 cents into it, and they're putting it in strongly. So as the Potomac craze of 2008 showed us, the community is definitely very interested in genetic and genomics. In 2008, also later on that year, the National Human Genome Research Institute announced that it was awarded more than $20 million to try and develop a cheap way to make genetic sequencing of a person's DNA standardized. It's going to become routine part of standardized healthcare. And we are 2011, 3 years later, and nobody has yet come up with the exact way, because the deal is you got to make it less than $1,000 for the testing. At the time, it was close to sequence the full genome, it was close to $100,000 at that time. So they're working really hard at finding it. But once this happens, we're opening up a whole new can of worms. That means any person going to a regular clinic visit who gets their yearly checkup, with their blood draws to find out your cholesterol levels or your liver function test, you also can get your genetics data, your DNA sequenced. And what does that mean? Does that mean that if the sequence comes back and you have a higher propensity to heart disease, does that mean we start preventative therapies? Or do we leave it alone and wait to see if something presents or not presents? If we don't do preventative therapies, are we going to be held accountable as the clinical team of knowing that there was evidence showing that there was this propensity for heart disease and we did nothing about it? But not everything that can be sequenced in the gene also shows up as something that you have. So how are we going to regulate this? How are we going to protect the public from it? Because I can tell you, as a hospital employee, the public is very demanding about what they want, what they assume we can do, and they want to make sure that if we can cure it, we offer it to them. So knowing the evidence of possible disease processes, like breast cancer, for instance, would it be in the public's best interest for a woman who shows up who potentially has a gene for breast cancer to offer her a double mastectomy early on before it even presents itself? Or would that be negligent on the part of the healthcare team in protecting patients from things that they don't really know about? But if they read the paper and see breast cancer as an option, are we doing them a disservice by not offering preventative therapy in the mode of a double mastectomy before it even presents? These are the questions that the healthcare team is going to have to start thinking about as opportunities for genetic sequencing become more prevalent.
Quick question, will
Yes.
we have a chance to discuss some of
Yes.
these issues
Yes.
later on?
Joe, I'm sorry. What we're going to do is have the 3 presentations. We're going to take a quick break, then we're going to come back and have a Q&A.
Any way works.
Yes. Dr. Alan Guttmacher, who was the interim director of NHGRI at the time, says the ability to sequence any individual's genome inexpensively and accurately is the quantum leap needed to usher in an age of personalized medicine in which healthcare providers will routinely use an individual's genetic code to prevent, diagnose, and treat disease. Prevent, diagnose, and treat, supposedly safer. This is the direction that we're going in with personalized medicine. Let's see if we can get that off. There we go. And this is also the most promising aspect of pharmacogenetics. This is where we're supposed to be going. But as I get to in the future, I'm not sure whether that is the way we are to go. Dr. Kaplan, who you may really know, he's one of the premier bioethicists in our country, he wrote that cure, not diagnosis, is a value-driven human genetics, and it's likely to do so in the future. By putting in this context, Dr. Kaplan is saying that the value of the right to be cured is where people think genetics needs to go. The concept of pharmacogenetics has to address this public demand that I have a right to have my illness cured. It is a value-based demand, and according to his statement, he believes that that's the way the future is going to be. When you make something value-based, you really imbue it with some serious authority. And if it's not just a basic general concept that people find enjoyable, that's something we can all ignore. But when it now becomes a value-based concept, we have to rise to the occasion, and science has to address the public's requirement accordingly. I'm not sure it's really that simple, though. There are many ethical and legal concerns regarding personalized medicine, and the GINA Act was the first way to address this. The Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act was an act of Congress that was done in 2008, and it was designed to prohibit the improper use of genetic information in health insurance and employment. The purpose really was to protect the public from health insurance companies or employers using genetic information to discriminate against them in any way, shape, or form. Health insurance companies could not say because of a pre-existing diagnosis or condition or possible genetic makeup, if your father had Alzheimer's and the thought that you may have Alzheimer's is there, they could not deny you health care or be part of a group plan just because of the possibility of a genetic link, as well as a company that you work for could not hire or fire or do anything related to your placement in their organization based on genetics. So this was the first attempt of the government to assist with this big craze of genetics and what do we do with this and how do we regulate it. Addressing the discrimination aspects was the first way that they went. And I think that the act was actually a very good one, and it helped to put to the forefront that we recognize that there are going to be a lot of issues as we move into this world of genetic databases and using genetics for research, and we need to start figuring out how to protect the public from what can be found. Also, there's a need to address a lot of the surrounding concerns to providing appropriate health care options. If we move into this direction, what else do we need to look at? Nobody has officially addressed yet any protective modes for things like access to appropriate health care if you do find something wrong with you, or environmental factors that help to trigger certain in situations as far as medicine goes. Dr. Charmaine Royal, who is one of the premier geneticists of our time, states that humans are so much more than a genome. If we truly want to decipher disease mechanisms in proactive personalized medicine to achieve optimal health, we must adopt a more holistic approach. What she means by this is that we need to face the realities that our population faces. Besides having, of course, access to technology, which is easy nowadays. Everybody has a computer in their home. If they don't, it's in their local library. It's in their offices. It's in their neighbor's house. Everybody has a television in their home. 20 years ago, that was not true. Nowadays it is. Not just television. Everybody has a cell phone that's a smartphone that takes pictures, takes the internet, has an app for that. So technology is around us as part of our everyday life, and access to the information that used to be private to the academic world because it was only published in journals that the academicians read is now very much open to anyone who just Googles it. All you have to do is ask the question, well, how do I find out whether I can be an athlete? Google has an answer for that. How do I find out whether, because my mother had this brain disease, will I get it? Google has an answer for it. So no longer are we requiring people to look in the academic research to figure out these issues, which used to kind of be a barrier for the average man or woman to understand what was going on, and they would go to the clinical team for advice. Nowadays, WebMD or iTriage, which is the new latest app on the iPhone and the Android platform, if you don't have it, you should get it, informs everyone about what's going on. Type in your symptoms. I have a headache, feel kind of chilled, maybe a fever, I'm not sure, but I'm kind of tired. You get a whole periphery of options of what your disease may be. You go to your doctor and you say, I think I've got scurvy. I don't need you to really tell me because my app showed it for me, right? I mean, like, it's very clearly put in the symptoms, I got a diagnosis. So that's where we are. But we have to be more realistic about how our public is going to deal with these issues. And Dr. Charmaine Royal, very forward-thinking, says that we need to be more mindful that it's no longer just a simple concept of here is my genome and that's it. But there are these environmental, social factors that we have to take into consideration and look at this at a very holistic way of being. This is just to open up the Pandora's box that we will talk about later. Some of the areas of concern that we need to worry about. Change is not easy, of course, but change is also necessary. But as we change, these are things we need to pay attention to. Who's going to get the testing? Who is going to be offered opportunities for personalized medicine? Is it going to be affordable for everybody, or is it just going to be affordable for those who have the ability to get it? Will insurance companies be mandated, like with dialysis? It's an act that we now have access to because of the fact that the government made it a right for equality. Everybody who has kidney disease has the ability to get dialysis. Are there some social and economic impacts that we need to pay attention to, and how do we overcome these problems? There will always be discrimination and misperceptions, so how do we address those? And of course, the automatic assumptions and mistrust of the medical field. Our population doesn't really trust us, and for good reason. We have a history that's kind of shady, so we haven't yet done a lot to help build up the trust, but we are building up the medicine more, so we need to figure out ways to address these mistrust issues. So this last video that I'm going to show is a bit of a parody. This is a video that was taken from a website that talks about where the public needs to go. They decided that what they were going to do is they were going to take all the pharmaceutical ads and kind of combine them together to show the reality of where we are in pharmacy and pharmacology to the public and ask the question, is there something better than this? So all this works. Okay, bad technology. This is very difficult to navigate. There we go.
You've got a headache, not got some strange disease, don't worry about it. This pill will set your mind at ease. It's called Progenitorivox. It's made by Squab Co. It's a life-enhancing miracle, but there are some things you should know. It may cause agitation, palpitations, excessive salivation, constipation, male lactation, rust-colored urination, hallucinations, bad vibrations, mild electric shock sensations, but it's worth it for the drugs I need. My disease may not be fatal, but I can ease my fears. I take each $12 pills each day for 50 years. They spent billions to convince me, so now I realize Progenitorivox beats diet and exercise. I've got insurance, at least for now I do. And if I bought generic, it would cut my costs in two. But I want Progenitorivox, cause I saw it on TV. Those families look so functional, that Paisley pills for me. But it may cause deprivation, humiliation, debtors, prison and deportation, dark predictions, dire predictions, blood vests, semen, dick inspections, empty pockets, court dockets, may cause eyes to pop from sockets, but it's worth it for the of dining. But it's worth it in Canada. They get this for a song. But it's worth it for the
The ideas expressed in this song are not necessarily those of Swellville Collaborative subsidiaries. Genophotobox is not available anywhere on the board in Wisconsin. Any resemblance to actual drugs, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Any unauthorized use of your own judgment in the application of Progenitor-Box is strictly prohibited. Progenitor-Box may not be reproduced without the express written and centric nature of the baseball. Progenitor-Box may cause drowsiness or restlessness in lab animals. If you have resumed sexual activity while
You get the gist. It goes on for a little while. So the question is, isn't there a better answer? And I actually think that there is. If we do a good job at genetics, creating personalized medicine, doing the research that's necessary to provide the optimal care options for our patients, and be very transparent with it, I think we've got something there. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the issues, of course, is that the entire viability of genetics, not only as a science, but as a practice, is predicated upon how these data are stored, accessed, and used. The whole issue of personalized medicine drills down the availability of large databases that are able to be compared to a sample. And as a consequence, the notion of pharmacogenomics, population-wide data, and pharmacogenetics as applied to the individual is solely dependent upon the nature of accessibility of data, not only about you, but about sample populations. You'll hear a little bit more about that later during today's lecture. However, one of the things that should be drawn from the lecture you just heard is that this same data that makes itself available to the medical community, by virtue of the cyber ubiquity, also makes itself available to you as a consumer, and moreover, to others as potential manipulators, individuals who can then gain access to these data, and as a consequence gain insights to the essence of you. The essence of you on a basis that begins from the genomic, extends itself up to the phenotypic, and then makes particular predictions. The issues that arraise themselves with regard to the capacity, capability, potential use, and misuse of genomically based and genetic information certainly then extend themselves more broadly not only to biology, but certainly to medicine, in both its terms to serve beneficent ends and potential malevolent ends. And I'd like you to keep that in mind. However, one of the issues that becomes increasingly important is that the scalar potentiality of what we can do within biological systems and within science in general is not only contingent upon the nature of the information, but how we get it and how we transmit it. Obviously, one of the limitations that has existed to date has been the scalar phenomenon. That is to say that we're working primarily within micro-level systems, and as such are both capacitized and limited by the issues of how much information can fit within a particular framework of space. One of the more ardent strides around that has been the fusion of cyber technology and cyber science to nanotechnology and nanosciences. As a consequence, this level of convergence and fusion offers three viable leaps forward, advances, progresses, and potential problematics. The first is the fusion of very, very high technology sciences in 2 dimensions. The second is the potential for what this then might offer with regard to information and scalar dimensionality. And the third is the virtual Pandora's box of 2 frontier sciences working in convergence, and as a consequence, a host of unforeseen effects, runaway consequences, and Wechselblatt phenomenon, which is basically that nature has a nasty sense of humor, and sometimes when we turn the rock over, we're not ready for what's under there. In each and all of these cases, as was evidenced before, the issue is not only availability, which then facilitates science, but accessibility, which offers itself a Janusian face of potential and problematic. Yes, we can use the information, it changes the mindset, but others can use this information as well. I'll throw down the gauntlet at this part to begin you to begin thinking about what's going on. How do we advance progress and at the same time balance our need for privacy and protection? This then becomes the ongoing question of cyber fusion. To address that at the scalar dimension and what these conjoined technologies may be able to do is our next speaker, Professor Ashok Vaseashta. Professor Vaseashta is with us from the Center for Advanced Research Convergences and also the Norwich University Advanced Research Initiative in Northfield, Vermont. As well, he is a fellow of the Institute of Nanotechnology. If we could we bring up Dr. Vaseashta's presentation. Please welcome our next speaker, my colleague, Professor Ashok Vaseashta.
Thanks, Professor Giordano, sir. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for all of you being here. The timing could not have been right. Captain Drew and myself attended cybersecurity briefing this morning, and the challenges which were presented obviously are numerous. And in this lecture today, or briefing, this is overview and also the summary, and there are 2 or 3 points which I would like to highlight. A, the science convergence, which Professor Giordano mentioned. The second point which I would like to highlight is time reverse engineering paradigm. What that means is where we are, where we want to get, and how do I coordinate these two, and how nanotechnology can augment cyber infrastructure and cyber science, which Professor Giordano alluded to. And of course, a brief summary. As I mentioned, summary is also the overview. And there is a statement which I had mentioned by Dr. Seitz, who had mentioned perhaps what's most significant about material research throughout history is that it's tended to be a major limiting factor in determining the rate at which the civilization could advance. So I would like to show where we are in terms of nanotechnology, where we are going, and of course research is ongoing in terms of these 2 extremities. Just to briefly show some of the folks which contribute to the center, and I also have with me Professor Yuri Dektyar back there. That's his picture roughly about 5 years ago. James Giordano, he's also part of the institute. We are directly opposite Dallas International Airport. But then again, some of the folks those who contribute to the science convergence activity are presented in that picture. So what's science convergence? Science convergence is simply looking at different fields and how the synergy of all those fields, what we can see at the intersection, which is new, which could obviously help us advance towards the future. It provides us new capability to understand natural world, human society, scientific research as closely coupled, complex, hierarchical system. And of course, we have different approach. One being the monitoring, identification, and surveillance of different types of research, and understanding some of the goals which are visionary, which are blue sky type of in nature, and what we have and how we can get there. So the bridge between these 2 is what we do at the Science Convergence Institute. Rather than going through some of these slides, I'll simply point out the gist, and that's the mission of the institute, that we develop several tools, one being the tech farm, which is essentially technology assessment and road mapping. We also have a couple of other tools, and we use these tools and provide them to different agencies in providing them vision as to where we are, where we can get, and how we can get there. So one of the limitations which we had in past is that our research has been evolutionary in nature. As you could see, what you see on the left is where we were perhaps in early 1900s and where we are today in 2010, 2011, looking at the different types of masks for protection. We used to put pigeons at the cave entrances to see what's in the caves, if there were some types of poisonous gases, of course, decontamination unit. If you see what used to exist in 1900s and what we have, the shapes have changed, but the principles are not all that much different. What that means is there has been evolutionary research. How we can translate that to revolutionary research, and that's essentially part of the science convergence. Then again, there is a mindset. Rather than again reading through all that, I probably would like to highlight a couple of them. One by Bill Gates, who had mentioned not too long ago, 1981, 640K ought to be enough for everybody. My PDA, perhaps a few gigabytes of memory in there. Then again, like I said, there are several interesting statements, again by Henry Ford, who had mentioned in 1908, the horse here is to stay, the automobile is novelty. And of course, we are looking into hybrid technology to see where we can, how we can advance this technology. also, most of the research has grown in independent domains. I worked for a university long enough to know that we used to have little kingdoms. One professor would not share instrument with the other, with the result all of us were reinventing fields. And what Professor Giordano is doing by bringing different fields is trying to coalesce all these fields together to create convergence, to obviously enhance interdisciplinary nature so that we are not recreating the wheel, just like the picture shows that they were inventing the dirt molecule. However, this is what we did in the previous century. These are some of the advances, achievements of the previous century, and what nanotechnology can do for the following century is what we will see. So this is a schematic, so to speak, of convergence activity where we look at nanotechnology, cognitive sciences, computational, and also systems and biology, and see what the intersection of all of that could provide. Again, this is a picture which simply shows pictorially as to how these fields merge together to produce something unique. And then again, you have to look at the intersection of these fields, not just biology, not just physics. We have to look in nanobio, for example, to see what unique can occur at that field and what that's going to provide in terms of, for this lecture, cyber infrastructure and cyber science. And the idea being that as a function of time, if we look at the synergy of all of these fields, of course, there would be technical advances which would occur at much faster rate. Although I must admit that this is something which is not new. There were some lectures there were some publications in 2002, and also in Europe, high-level experts group had published something similar. What's unique about what we do is looking at different tools, looking at different approaches, and how we can, rather than going through a natural cycle of evolutionary to accelerated evolutionary to disruptive to revolutionary, by these tools, how we can go directly from where we are to a revolutionary stage so that we can decrease the time in which all of this research can occur. And of course, part of my research is to look at this technology and how we can address some of the global challenges, and of course the ones which are pointed out in terms of energy, water. We have a Clean Water Institute looking at the environment, terrorism, and war, because we support Department of Defense, how we can support all of that through convergence of all of that. Now coming back to nanomaterial, this slide simply shows, if you look at nanomaterial, their fundamental their dimensions are pretty close to the fundamental particles of nature. Again, just to read a couple of them: de Broglie electron wavelength, penetration depth of the magnetic field. What this does is, since we operate at the fundamental physical level, we can design a material based on specifications which we have, rather than having something based on the specification of a given material, and that's the capability these nanomaterials do offer to us. And of course, we know as the size decreases, the surface area increases, meaning thereby they have a whole lot more reactivity, and of course that's used for chemical and biological sensors, which is one of the charge which we have from Defense Department, looking at how sensors work, and I'll show you one or two schematics based on that. So, as you know, as the size decreases, as the electron velocity increases, we have high speed, high density, and of course one can make single electron transistor. That means there is a lot more speed by which these devices operate, and of course all the enablers they give us indication that we can get pretty close to artificial intelligence and of course capability. And the word which is written in Latvian is provided by Yuri, and what that simply means is that on an average we are using 250 megabytes of information per person per year, but I think we are using a whole lot more. So using these nanomaterials with high speed, with high density, one can then enhance the cyber infrastructure using these types of high density, high speed types of devices. And of course, again, looking at some of the applications being the telepresence and telecollaboratory, such as in data mining, effective searching, and again, all that which goes with the telepresence and telecollaboratory. As I mentioned that we attended this cybersecurity with my colleagues in Moldova, we work on quantum entanglement, having a encrypted security so that, of course, we don't have this asymmetric threats because of the fact we have a much higher level of security which is presented by the nanomaterials or the nanofibers and communication devices which are being prepared using nanomaterials. One of the areas which I had worked, and of course I consulted with my colleagues, is negative refractive index materials, which are called plasmonics or nanophotonics. And one of the applications is that in nature, the negative refractive index materials do not exist. The blue area which is shown in this schematic is simply an area which provides these types of materials. And if we have these materials, negative refractive index, what that means is the satellite communication obviously would be much faster and we can cover a whole lot more area. This is what you see at the airport these days. And having nanoplasmonics or nanophotonics, this is what we will be seeing in the future, and that obviously enhances the security of the, especially the DHS and TSA. As far as satellites are concerned, the areas which are highlighted, these are the areas where nanomaterials have great advantage, such as in bus structure, battery, thermal blanket, solar arrays, transmitter, and so forth. And having all that, then one can have a vision of satellite, nanosatellites, and I'll have schematic in the following area, so that you have larger swath, meaning thereby you can cover larger area and of course much higher resolution, which would obviously enhance security and of course communication, which goes with that. We had worked on pollution monitoring with one of my students in Bangkok, and what you see in the upper left-hand corner is a PDA which she had made, which was based on nanomaterials-based sensors which were distributed across the city. And of course we had access to satellite data, so what you see is a juxtaposition of these two images, so that sitting on your desk you have pollution count from all over the city. And of course our objective at that point was to have this system commercialized so that this type of information can be provided to policymakers. And then again, if you see nanomaterials would, if we have nanophotonics, if we have nanomaterials based sensor, then of course this types of application would obviously be easily available on everybody's desktop. One of the projects which I'm working with my colleagues in Turkey is on essentially making nanofibers which could be introduced into the patient, those who had traumatic brain injury, so that there's a communication in the brain of neurons, and of course that also requires tremendous amount of information that has to be transmitted. So I see nanomaterials having lots of application, not only in enhancing the communication, but also the data communication which goes with that. This is something which we had worked on, but that was mostly for the soldier's jacket, where we had introduced nanofibers, and that enhances the mechanical strength of the jacket. But the future vision is to incorporate several devices which can communicate with the commanders, so that a commander has literally all the physiological data and the type of environment the soldier is in the field, and I think that would also enhance the capability. And all this communication is enhanced by nanomaterials, and of course provide enhanced security for the soldiers in the field. And of course, as far as the therapy is concerned, nanomaterials, this is a combination of nanomaterials enhanced because it's plasmonic based imaging, so obviously that provides high resolution, and of course if there were more communication, then of course this type of therapy and imaging would obviously be much more facilitated. So the mission space, as I mentioned, in limited time I could obviously provide a vision of it. So the mission space using nanomaterial is that of self-assembly, self-healing, self-learning, adaptive, reflective, actionable, agile, resilient, avoiding surprise, speed and size, that as you saw does matter, and self-propelling, and people, those who have aviation background, obviously would like the fact that what you push against is what lifts you. So obviously, if we are able to develop all that technology, that obviously would provide lots of capability, lots of flexibility as far as the cyber infrastructure, cyber science is concerned. Here are some of the fundamental questions. Probably don't have time to read all of them, with the exception of perhaps a couple of them. For example, how do we go beyond silicon and electronics, which Professor Giordano had mentioned. Also, if you see that yellow question mark, Professor Giordano had mentioned about the Moore's law. Why do we have to follow Moore's law? Using nanoelectronics, we can do better than that. We can perhaps go beyond the Moore's law curve. That means we can put more devices in a three-dimensional space in the same area with much faster speed. So that means obviously that would be better than the Moore's law. And looking at nature, bio-inspired material, nanomaterial would perhaps help us understand lots of those principles. As mentioned, lots of questions which came to mind, I had put these, but understanding some of these fundamental questions perhaps would help us understand the enhanced cyber infrastructure and cyber science, and of course some additional dimensionality which we don't have at the present time. And this is the vision of a integrated sensor on chip, network on chip. And yesterday in one of the presentation, a speaker had mentioned human on chip, and of course I would like to argue that it should be artificial intelligence on chip as compared to human on chip, and as I mentioned, that presents a vision of a sensor network which can perhaps look at different threats in parallel and then transmit all that information over the cyber infrastructure to the commanders in the field, so that obviously we have better understanding of the types of threat environment we are in. Very quickly, wanted to mention about the Foresight, which we do. As I mentioned, there are 2 or 3 tools which we look at, one being the tech farm. We developed some strategic tool for developing Foresight. And these are some of the tools which are followed for Foresight, such as environmental scanning, scenario planning, heuristic, Delphi, technical panels, and so forth. But these are the tools which at ISC we follow. One, as I mentioned, is the tech farm, which is the technology foresight assessment and road mapping. We look at different technology. We see by way of different techniques such as heuristic and data mining where we are and where we can get in terms of technology. The other being automated data analysis, mining, and surveillance. And the third being new and emerging science and technology surveillance. So using these 3 tools, we continue to monitor and make some type of projection as to where the technology is going. And of course, nanotechnology in support of cyber science and cyber infrastructure, that being one of them. And this is an overview of the process which we follow, which is simply going from defining a project to reviewing some of the current situation, identifying lenses, answer questions, and then, as mentioned, that we do heuristic, we have panels, we select drivers, and then try to backcast to the present, which I had mentioned initially, is the time reverse engineering as to where we can get in terms of the technology. So these are three, in the following 3 slides, I picked some of the bullets which these books had mentioned. This is Brockman's list of next 50 years. They had mentioned about cybersphere, which is information being, only the highlighted ones are the ones which are relevant to this lecture. Cybersphere, which is information being, portable telecommunication, ubiquitous smart network, quantum math computing, neuroscience. Then there was another business list which had cognitronics, genotyping, combinatorial science, molecular manufacturing, quantum nucleonics, and a long-term list had similar items listed, and this is what we had recommended, and the one which highlighted from the top is the impact of convergent technology based on some of the tools which I had mentioned, was a term which we coined along with other friends, nanoinformatics, which is a new discipline that aims to organize, standardize, shape, compare, analyze, and visualize the vast amount of data being gathered at nanoscale, and that obviously is possible with the help of nanotechnology. So with that, let me conclude with this proverb. Hear counsel, receive instructions, and accept correction, that you might be wise in the time to come. With that, let me thank you very much for your attention.
So one of the things that you should be aware of is that cyber is not only a science, is not only a technology, but also becomes a viable space. It becomes a space of informational access, it becomes a space of informational manipulation, and also becomes an information space of use and utility for a variety of different user groups and populations. As we saw earlier, evidently, one of the issues is medical, and much of the Human Genome Project was predicated upon potential trajectories that cyber science could assume. The realization that ever increasingly has been manifest in the fact that genomic and genetic data becomes viable within the medical realm. And moreover, it becomes much more viable also within the public realm to determine particular trajectories that individuals may not only assume by virtue of what they do, but also what they are. The question then, how do we keep such information accessible, and at the same time secure? Obviously, one of the issues that raises its head is the nature of another set of technologies, nanotechnologies. And the fusion, the convergence of cyber science and technology and nanotechnology then offers a virtual explosion of potentiality and possibility. Whether or not we can then maintain the same levels of security utilizing these tools represents a new challenge, not only for the cyber community and the nanoscience community, but the idea of the integrated scientific convergent community and the issue of maintaining convergent scientific security. How do we maximize utility and at the same time maximize security? I give you these questions in the spirit of the philosopher of science, Bruno Latour, who I'm fond of quoting in this forum. Not necessarily to provide answers, but in many ways to raise the questions. One of the things that comes up over and over again is the fact that, indeed, cyber science, coupled perhaps with genetics and nanoscience, can be utilized on the human frontier as information. The vector of informational sciences within the human dimension very often is neuro. Many of our cyber models, the initial models of artificial intelligence, and secondary, tertiary, and now quaternary models that utilize network design for vast-scale rapid transfer of information are based upon what's known as quasi-realistic neuromodels. And reciprocally, we're learning more about the neural systems from our understanding of cyber as a multidimensional network hierarchy in an n-dimensional vectored space. The question then, what is the fusion of neuroscience and cyber science, and what are the potentials and challenges that this raises? Well, what this lecture will try to do is bring together some of the points that were raised, the questions that were raised, and throw to you probably one of the more fundamental challenges. The challenge of balancing scientific and technological advancement with the necessary security that appears to be warranted with regard to how these things are utilized and how they could be misutilized. Obviously, advances in neuroscience have been multifold. Many of them have grown out of the Human Genome Project. Certainly, these are becoming ever more manifest through the use of potential and viable nanotechnologies, including things like technologically enabled neuroimaging, before you see a standard functional MRI image of the brain, neurogenomics and neurogenetics, reflecting the talk you heard earlier, and a field that then brings neurogenetics one step further to, called neuroproteomics, which essentially addresses the metabolic and protein profile of a given individual at a point in time and is then able to plot that out as a consequence of their environmental interaction and make certain predictions. What we know is that these are not only technologically enabled, but these are also very translationally viable into the field of medicine, and to any one of those applications where large volume biological information is necessary to make determinants about the state of an organism and their viable potentiality. So here we see the idea of being able to correlate anatomical and physiological data, population variations and predispositional assessments. How is it, in fact, that you are what you are, and how does that compare to your population or group of cohorts? And ultimately, individual trajectories, not only what you are now, but what you will become. What we know is that each and every one of these particular dimensionalities is reliant upon the use of data that have to be pulled down very often in real time and used as measures of comparators. Individually, what we see is a data space that looks something like this. We're now utilizing the access of cyber science. We're able to literally accumulate lifespan-based data. One of the things we're seeing increasingly in neuroscience is the need for what's known as large-scale neurodata banks. Now, this certainly raises a number of ethical, legal, and social issues, but on the pragmatic side alone, the fact that neuroscience can work given its advanced technologies is based, at least in part, upon the ability to amass data from birth to grave and utilize these data in a variety of different time spans as a comparator to point data with regard to current aggregates. This may also apply to a variety of other sciences, but certainly in the neurosphere, this is one of the things where we're looking at ever more increasing complex data, utilizing genetic information, nanotechnology, and what we know about the extant brain-mind. In other words, what we have right now, how does that compare to what you are right now across a number of different variables, and how do we compare that to lifespan data? The only way that this is achievable in real time, ladies and gentlemen, is through the use of cyber technology and science. Moreover, it's not sufficient enough to be able to determine what you are with an N of 1 comparison to what you were and what you may become, but we understand that the virtue, the strength of these information is in their comparative and normative capability. So what we see here is what's sometimes referred to as the cone of capability, or in some cases the cone of confusion, depending on how you look at it. So we now take all of these, we take all of these individual data that I just showed you in the previous slide, we recognize these now sit in what's known as a data hierarchy. And the data hierarchy is potentiated and actualized through the use of cyber science and cyber technology, inclusive but not limited to cloud computing. We now compare individual data to life and time span data of this individual against cohort data of individuals who are then like in a variety of ways and different in a variety of ways, and then ultimately to populational data inclusive across time. The only way this is accommodatable is through the use of cyber technology. Why? Because it allows the amassing of large data banks, and there have been a number of projects that indeed have not only posed this, but have proposed models that indeed do this at least in a putative fashion. It allows us to take comparisons on one end, and through these comparisons establish particular norms. What is the basis of health, disease? What is the basis of a particular ontology? But understand, each one of these points, not only that we see here, but as we see before you, also represent access portals. Any one of these data trajectories that are indeed cyber fusion accommodatable also mean that these are accessible in real time, not only through primary users, but through secondary and perhaps unwanted users. So each one of these viable tiers of data then become an essential portal by which information about the you-ness of you in comparison to large populations and cohorts may be accessed, assessed, and perhaps manipulated. Well, obviously this then calls to the fore a number of validity and reliability issues. Number one, virtually all of these types of neuroscientific data to be valid and meaningful indeed require large volume data banks. Neuroimaging has been rendered relatively hobbled without a large-scale comparator. Much of the real validity of neuroimaging, as well as neurogenomics and neuroproteomics, certainly requires large volume data, at least about the individual, And in reality, if you're going to do any type of epidemiological or standardizing work, then requires large volume data about various populations, cohorts, etc., both in a single point in time and over a variety of time spans. Moreover, what we understand is that integration here is also possible. The idea of creating these comparators, and obviously there's a longitudinal data input. These data have to be input over a long period of time, both in individuals and in groups, and as a consequence, they also have to be real-time accessible. If I'm going to use this in a medical framework, a biological framework, a research framework, a predictive framework in the public sphere and national defense, I have to be able to pull these data down at my access in reality so as to make them authentic and meaningful. This then speaks to the fact that cyber technology and science as a mindset and as a host of techniques and tools offers the viability to potentiate a variety of sciences, neuroscience being principal among them. And what we can see is that this maximizes the capacity for storage and retrieval, it increases the capacity for parallel computing. These are scalable, as you heard earlier, they're customizable based upon genomic, proteomic, metabolomic, individual as well as populational data, and of course they're accessible and shareable. Accessible and shareable. Accessible and purloinable. Accessible and bastardizable. In other words, as the pundits will tell you over and over again, ladies and gentlemen, if it's stackable, it's hackable. Moreover, what we recognize is each and every one of those potential data vectors that I showed you in the 2 slides of individual and cohort-based data represent viable ports of fracture. As my colleague Matt Labor in the back of the room will tell you, each one of these are chinks in the proverbial armor that we like to delude ourselves and think, oh yes, we're secure. But in reality, information about the you-ness of you, both what you were, what you are, as well as potentially what you may become, all become viable portals for integration, manipulation, and all of the ethical, legal, public, and perhaps secure informational changes that then are viable. Obviously, these effects can be manifest in 3 temporal dimensions: the proximate, the intermediate, and the distal. If we just consider the information you heard earlier about genetics and the meanness of me and what that means for my particular state and how that then represents my ability, what I am, what I could be, not only to my insurance provider or my particular healthcare providers, but also to jobs, the government. And what happens if we change that? What happens if we change a small genetic code, for example, and suddenly now I'm predisposed to X, Y, or Z? And that then changes my capacity to do a particular job. And perhaps my family, and then changes the direction of allocation of resources. What happens then? Obviously, what we're seeing is this becomes much more of a strategic implement rather than a tactical one. And manipulation of any one of these particular portals has both intermediate effect with regard to what it's able to do with inappropriate data sharing and very long-term effect. We can incur major shifts in the zeitgeist and world outlook of public health systems, economic systems, and entire social structures based upon simple manipulation of individual and or cohort, if not populational data. And moreover, the more specific we can become with regard to the use of nanoscience and technology, the more purloinable these effects may be. I'll leave the slide up there as a sobering reminder as to the fact that each one of these temporal dimensions are in fact bastardizable. That's a nice way of saying they can weasel their way in here, and as a result, this represents each one of the chinks in the armor that require some type of secure correction. Approximately, accessibility and use and misuse of the data. That is, what I am right now can be changed via some purloinment of the data that may be stored in either some type of data bank or cloud computational network. Intermediately, this is data modification. Who I am, what I am, my access. One need only think, for example, of military records, healthcare records, genetic records, banking records that then reflect the type of thing that I am and what I can do, even on just the medical side. Certainly neuroscience is huge on this. And moreover, distal effects. How are we going to then cover for the shift in our infrastructures that arise from cyber infiltration? Well, this then speaks to the security issues that arise, particularly in my field in neuroscience, because there have been multiple calls for large-scale data banks that then allowed a downloadable profile of individuals' anatomical, physiologic, genetic, and perhaps constitutive data, what it means to be you. But if all the things that it means to be you represent viable portals of potential manipulation by an unrequested other, what do we then do to say, yes, I want a physician or healthcare provider to have complete access? The nanophysiologic chip that may in fact be implanted that allows real-time data access may also be alterable. How then do I have this need to engage these types of security issues so that I can address pragmatic utility, making sure that these frontier areas of science, genome, nano, neuro, are viable and valuable, coupled with protection, coupled with privacy. Because very often, as much as we talk about this, and we love the idea of personalized medicine, and we love the idea of nanopotentiated environmental and biological systems, we get very, very queasy, and suddenly we have the notion of big brother. In any way at all. In fact, the notion of the, quote, privacy or freedom box very often speaks very strongly to that. For those of you who are readers of the New York Times, you know the freedom box represents an independent data resource that allows individuals to establish complete networks without having to engage large-scale data sharing acquisition systems. This has been seen as a viable way by which we can then downscale that for portable medical information. However, these two are not unhackable. They certainly are hackable. So what are potential security means that have been rendered? Well, one is called multiple grade permutational code analysis. This represents a very, very rapid time, nano-enhanced computational algorithm that shifts the access codes to particular user portals in very, very rapid time, on the scale of seconds. Obviously, we'd see that nanoscience can increase that computational capacity by bypassing Moore's law of registrations and regulation. Moreover, something known as the Rutgers model. It was first proposed in 2001, that in the past 10 years has certainly gained a variety of different algorithms and has gained some legs. This is a multi-step encryption that would allow particular user groups to have to access a rather tortuous but very, very rapid time encryption model to gain access to particular forms of data. I believe this is one of the things that Matt Labor is working on, not only on the security side, but also with regard to the information side. One of the more viable models that have been utilized, particularly in healthcare, and neuroscience specifically, is the notion of structured sharing communities. But here too, the specter of rapid access, large-scale data acquisition, and security raises its ugly head. In fact, there's a hydra. We can whack down one head, but that other head comes back to bite us in the fanny. How then do we, in fact, go forward? What you may have heard over the past hour or so may have sounded to you like great potential, great possibility, but then I come along and lift my leg on the trade and it gets terrible. Well, my goal here is not just to fetch about the dark, but to at least provide a roadmap towards lighting a candle and trying to keep it lit. I think one of the things that becomes important when looking at these convergent sciences is to have a process in place that allows us to at least take ardent steps towards developing necessary security algorithms, processes, and capabilities if we're going to utilize cyber technology in convergence with genome, nano, neuro, and perhaps other advanced and frontier biologics and natural and physical science dimensions. Obviously, pragmatic analysis. What can we really do? Let's not be pie in the sky and play mind games. Science fiction is lovely, but that works great as a bedtime story. This is 24/7. This is the real deal. What do these systems actually offer, both now and in the immediate future? A preparatory posture. If it is hackable, it is stackable. Prepare for that. What types of fail-safes will we in fact build into the system so that if hacking occurs, we don't see large-scale system manifestations, so as to then conjoin and at the same time constrict the level of scientific convergence activities that would then become manifest. Number three, the right personnel. It has to be interdisciplinary. By its very nature, as Matt Labor will tell you, as General Reese will tell you, the cyber field is not a silo, but evermore is becoming a more cosmic issue, in the strictest sense of the word. The cybercosm that engages chemistry, physics, informational science with the social science to be able to think around the proverbial corner. I say we need to take at least a skeptical view, and in part of that skepsis enjoins pessimism. I would like to think that the chastity belt of science and security lies in such skepticism. And as a consequence, what that then allows us to do is to put these together and say, now how will we move forward? How will we implement a system that we know, if it fails, it will fail safe, and if it doesn't fail safe, these manifestations are retractable, recuperable, recoverable, or forgivable. And to do this, obviously, we will then need policy that allows those individuals who are going to manifest these security-based changes and advance the science to do what it is that they do. Policy has to be in place. Our group has dealt with something called NISMA, which is the Neuroscience Information Shepherding, Stewardship, and Non-Discrimination Act. We've posed this as a possible act. We've posed what this language would look like, although very, very tentative, based upon, at least in part, the GINA language, the Genetic Information Non-Discriminatory Act. But a major component of that is security and stewardship. not simply non-discrimination. Oh, indeed, we don't want these data to be purloined, misused, abused, so as to divert entire trajectories of individual or social activity. No, no, the issue is how do we put systems in place, individuals in place, policies and procedures in place that are going to enhance stewardship and enhance security. This is critical because it allows us to then think around the proverbial corner. And the reason it's important to think around the corner is something my dad, who was an engineer, used to tell me when I was a kid. He used to tell me, Jim, measure twice, cut once. Far too often, there is no going back. This is certainly the case, not only with cyber science as a technique, technology, and tool, but certainly we then consider its conjoinment with other areas of frontier biosciences. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your time.
Panel, if I could ask you to retake your seats up front. Put a lot of food for thought. What I want to do now is I want to open it for questions from you and let the panel engage. So, please, have at it. Doctor,
Let me
please.
start not with a question, but with an assertion. Early on, several speakers introduced the advanced science convergence as a problem. I see it as an opportunity. I see it as something that happens all the time automatically. The history of science is replete with bridge building from field A to field B. With some bright individuals says, if I use these methods that I learned over here on this problem, it's easy to solve. That's the way it's done, folks. So if it gives you a problematic headache, because what will I do with that? I'll say relax. Most of it will take care of itself. Now, not all of it, clearly, because it's possible to do evil things. But so is it possible to do evil things in many, many other ways. I wouldn't single that one out as a dragon to be worried about. Accept it, exploit it. It's a useful planning device, and you do it by often putting people in adjacent offices in the same department. You hope they'll get together and work together on something that'll be different than what's happened before. So this is just one comment, and with that I'll stop. I have lots more thoughts, but I need to think about it more. It's really very interesting, very challenging.
If I could speak to that, then I'm going to hand that over to Ashok, because Ashok actually runs a center called Advanced Scientific Convergence, and I think that's important for him to address. Charles, you're absolutely right. I mean, number one, it represents a historical reality, so it is a historicity.
So there's something to it.
Oh, without a doubt. You know, I mean, if nothing else, it's a folk empiric. We know it works.
Yeah.
Number two, I think one of the things that has happened very often, those types of convergences have tended to occur somewhat stochastically by, as you know, epistemological and technical drift. Well, over the past 150 years, that has not been the case, and so that's one of the things we certainly want to take a bird's eye view of and say, now, wait a minute, how is this fusion occurring? One of the things that we find happening is that although the actual science and technology tend to naturally or almost axiomatically converge towards new dimensions that then utilize the tools of one science and technologies of another in a particular scientific orientation, or even towards a new science, neuroscience was that, by the way, what we tend to find lagging arduously behind are all of the preparatory stances with regard to the possibilities the fusion of these sciences can then occur. We absolutely see that historically as well. And I'm not just talking about the ethical, legal, and social issues. I'm talking about the actual manifest issues that arise from the convergence of those sciences. So now you then see ampliative issues that arise both positively and negatively. And as you know, and we've discussed this, the more rapid the science and the more frontier it is, the less viable a precautionary principle really is, for two reasons. The first is that the risk and burdens may always outweigh the benefits, because the benefits tend to be proximate. We can't see around the proverbial corner where benefits may not be as viable. And number two, what it really tends to do is it tends to artificially impose some maxim of restricting progress, which simply is not going to occur. Right? So the preparatory stance, I think, is issue.
If you try that.
Oh, exactly right. So I think you've raised a good point, but in support of your point, one of the things that we're really looking to do is to understand how particularly the field of cyber becomes a very, very useful carpet upon which this very, very new dance of integration can occur, because it allows for very rapid speed, large-scale information sharing
let's face it, 20 years ago was certainly not available, and in many ways was not even accommodatable, given the information networks and tools that were available,
But a lot of people saw then that it would happen, it could happen, and it would, because of the natural pressures to do these things.
Agreed.
In wide bandwidth, it was obvious totally going to happen, because all of the people in the world wanted to exchange pictures. And that for many reasons, good, bad, or stupid, or smart. And that eats bandwidth like crazy. But some of us who were working this 20 years ago, and even 40 years ago, said, of course, I mean, it's going to happen.
I completely agree that the science convergence naturally occurs. It has been there for quite some time. If you recall, there were a few publications I had mentioned which had appeared way back in 2002, 2004. What's different in what we do, we have put science into the process in science convergence. As I mentioned, we are developing few tools such as TechFarm, such as Nest, and we had gathered all the best brains, I mean, per se.
Enough.
enough, not the best. Enough brains into the process so that we are trying to put science into the process so that it's not forecasting. We try to call that as a foresight, so that we can predict based on scientifically validated models as to where we can get. And these are the tools based on heuristic. We have a very strong Delphi network, and we are using that heuristic to not only predict based on data mining, but also what experts tell us. And I do agree with you, and I'll give you two examples as to the technology which helps us can also hurt us. One example, without going into too much detail because obviously it has security aspect, is dual-use nanomaterials. And there's a colleague of mine with whom I'm working on dual-use nanomaterials because we make sensors using nanomaterials, and of course using adding biomaterials, we can make extremely sensitive sensors so that we can detect even partial DNAs. But at the same time, nanomaterials combined with biological molecules can also serve as bioweapons. So we are trying to use the technology which we are developing to what potentially can come towards us. Just to give, that's one example. As I mentioned, that I don't want to go too much into detail, obviously for security aspect. Yesterday I received a statement from a bank that they have changed my PIN of my debit card, and I know that in past 15 days I've not used my debit cards. So obviously that means somebody has tried to use that. Now, why am I saying this? We are working on...
No, you should immediately cancel that account because somebody obviously has stolen it.
Exactly. So...
very dangerous, very obvious. You're lucky you got an early signal. You might not have found out until all the millions of dollars were gone.
I checked my statement and
yes, please do.
It seemed to be in order, but you're right. I was in the UK. It seems that perhaps, I don't know how, maybe I must have used a credit card or debit card at the hotel, and they take imprint, so it's quite possible. The reason I did this is
security number.
Right. The reason I mentioned this because we are working on quantum entanglement to increase the safety, but at the same time, the same technology can be used for deciphering someone's account, hacking into somebody's account, just like James had mentioned. If it's if it could be
stacked, it could be hacked.
Right, it could be hacked as well. So the same technology which we're developing, we have to develop guards against the same technology as well.
I think the real danger of quantum schemes is to deny service of it. It's easy. It's very hard to protect physically that nobody can destroy your system. I may not be able to read your mail, but I can make sure you don't get any. That should be simple about it.
Any other questions? Dr. Hummel.
Well, first of all, I think you should note that the person that's been questioning you.
No, I was making comments.
I am. I begin with comment. But it should be noted in the room because people may not understand that he refers to 40 years ago or something. That the internet, which is sort of the basis of
Of the cyber.
of the cyber field, of the whole cyber area, and has enabled a great increase in convergence of information sources of all sorts. But among the people involved in making decisions that led to the development of the internet was truly Dr. Hertzfeld.